Hello, everybody. Thank you, Red. Uh, Thank you for joining me for Book 5 of Bhagavatam, otherwise known as Fifth Canto. We are continuing to translate and explore it on the first pass, through it. So the story so far. By the way, I have a lot of clarifications to give you. The story so far is continuing from part 4. Part 4, we heard that Brahma created Shatarupa and Manu, who could create organically replicating beings. And then they had 3 daughters and 2 sons. And in Canto 4, we followed the family lines of each of those 3 daughters and one of the 2 sons. And various interesting stories came up along the way because of the interesting things that the people in those families did. So we never covered the 5th son. So now, the 5th child, the 2nd son, the older son. So now the story is going to go back to talk about him. So here is his history fully clarified. I finally fully clarified it over the last week. His brother's family line is Uttanapada, his brother, Dhruva. And then, can't really remember Dhruva's kids, but the next big name in Dhruva's descendants is Prithu. And then there's many, many generations from Prithu to Barishat, and then Prachetas. If you're following along these streams, you remember all these names and the stories about them. Do you remember the story of the Prachetas ended with them having a very fantastic child, who was the reincarnation of Daksha, Sati's father. So now, here's the clarified information. Now, Daksha, he refuses to take over the kingdom from his fathers, the Pracheta. He instead decides that he has to first get back all his power. Because he's Daksha, but now he got reincarnated, so he doesn't have his power. But he can get it back if he does sadhana. So he decides that he's going to just depart from the scene and do yoga until he can get his power back. And that took, I think it's 3 manvantaras, which is some fantastic, huge number of millions of years. So the Prachetas, although they produced a child, they couldn't produce another king. So the world needed a king, and Manu felt that Priyavrata should be the king. Now, one of the kind of fantastic, amazing things is, good to see you still. One of the fantastic, amazing things is that Priyavrata is still alive. Whereas his brother is gone, his sisters are gone, I believe they're all gone, and there's been dozens of generations have passed. But Priyavrata is still alive, and there's a particular reason for that. The reason is that Priyavrata didn't become the king. Uttanapada did. Even though Priyavrata was the oldest son. Priyavrata had no interest in ruling a kingdom. Instead, he went and learned about spirituality from Narada and then practiced it. So already these people are not humans. They're proto-humans, and already they're living in other yugas where the environment is much more powerful. But even compared to his contemporaries, he's able to live for a fantastic amount of time because of his yoga. So because he's keeping his life force very carefully, he stays alive for a very long time. So after all these generations, when the royal line runs out and we don't get a king, Manu says, well, we need to call Priyavrata. But Priyavrata is busy, asking Upanishadic questions to Narada and meditating on the answers in the forest. So Manu goes to the forest, sees Narada and Priyavrata and says, Priyavrata, you have to become the king. Priyavrata's like, what? I'm sadhu in the forest. I'm not going to become a king. So Manu appeals to his father, Brahma, to help him out. Brahma comes down. And now that's where we are at the story. Brahma opens up his conversation. The last time we did this, Brahma gave us we covered about 4 or 5 verses where Brahma made this one particular point that, hey, Priyavrata, this is your destiny. This is your fate. You're born in a royal family. And it's your destiny that you're going to have to take on royal duties. You shouldn't try to avoid destiny because destiny is benevolent. That was Brahma's big point, which is quite an important thing for us all to learn. Destiny is benevolent, even if it's unappealing, even if it's uncomfortable. Benevolent. So that was a point he made yesterday. Now, today, in this new material, he's going to make a new point. And that point is, the self-realized need not fear the conventional world. So Priyavrata's whole thing is, I don't want to become a king. I don't want to get involved in karma. I don't want to get involved in queens and princes and princesses and armies and laws and government. I want to meditate. And the reason I don't want to get involved in that stuff is because it's going to distract me from my spiritual focus. So Brahma now is going to deliver maybe 6 or so verses where he's going to hit on that. And he's going to say, you have a misconception. You have a misconception that being involved in the conventional world, in the ordinary world, in the regular world, where you deal with families, where you deal with sex, where you deal with laws, where you deal with government, where you deal with money, being involved in that world, you think that it's going to screw up your spirituality. That's a misconception. So that's what Brahma's going to deliver to us today. He says, Mukto pitavat Vipriyat swadeham arabdam ashnan abhimana shunya yathanubhutam pratiyata nidra kim tvanya dehaya gunan navrinte. So we hear the different words, exactly what they mean. And here's the translation. He says, even liberated people still have physical bodies, which they humbly accept as the manifestation of their previous karmas. They consider it the same way we consider experiences we had in a dream after we wake up. So they do not solicit another body from the world. So this thing, they do not solicit another body from this world, means that they're not going to get reborn. They're going to get out of samsara. So even liberated people, muktopi, they have a body, deha, and biprat, they keep it. Even liberated people keep their body because it's their arabdha. It's the manifestation of their destiny. It's the manifestation of their karma. So they accept it, ashnan. With abhiman shunya, this has 2 meanings. For a liberated person, to accept their karma is not prideful. It's not egotistical. It's egotistical to say, I'm a liberated person. I don't want to have anything to do with this material world. It's condescending. And if you doubt that, then go hang out in an ashram of neophytes who are trying to live spiritual lifestyles, they're condescending as hell about all those karmis and materialists and blah, blah, blah. So what Brahma is saying is that a real spiritualist is abhiman shunya. They're not condescending. They're not egoistic. They realize that they still have karma left over. They're not generating new karma, but they still have karma left over. That's arabdha. It's already manifest. And so they deal with it, biprat, in the form of their body, deha, and the world that their body is in. But their attitude or their experience of their body is different from the way a non-liberated person experiences their body. And in the way that he describes it is really easy for us to understand. It's a really great analogy. He says, Yatanu bhutam pratiyata nidra. He says, when you wake up, pratiyata nidra, when you get out of sleep, or when you realize that you're asleep, or you give off your sleep, then yatanu bhutam, anubhuta means the things that you experienced while you were asleep. Yata, it's like that. So he's saying the way that they experience their body is the same way that we feel. The way they feel about their body and the experiences that they go through with it is the same way we feel about the body and the experiences that we had in a dream, not while we're dreaming, but after we realize that we were dreaming, after we wake up. And so because of that attitude, they have a huge buffer between their concept of the real self and the concept of a conditional or temporary self, like you would have if you were lucidly dreaming, or if you were remembering a dream you just had. There's a huge buffer between you realizing I am actually A, but in this dream I am B. And so they don't get mixed up in B too much. And therefore they don't solicit another body from that whole situation. See? This is a very clear verse. Mukto pitavad vipriyat swadeham arabdamashnan abhimana shunya yatanubhutam pratiyatmanindra kim tvanya deha gunanavnikte. What do we got here? Any questions? Kermit likes it. All right. So that's the first point. Even if you're liberated, you still deal with your body, but you don't deal with it in the same way. Now, this next thing that he says. Bhayam pramatasya vaneshvapi syat. Yatas aste sahasatsapatna. Jitendriyasyatmarater. Let me see if I kept this bad translation. Good, I kept it. I fixed it. Bhayam pramatasya vaneshvapi syat yata saaste sahasatsapatna jitendriyasyatmarater buddhasya grihashrama kim nukarotyavadyam. On the other hand, so this means a person who's not mukta. On the other hand, a person may retire to the forest, but if they are still intoxicated with self-ignorance, the forest is very dangerous for their spirituality because they will live there with 6 enemies. In contrast, the wisdom of a person who has mastered their 6 senses and delights in the self can never be damaged, neither by the forest nor by a conventional home life. So what's he saying? He's saying if you're mukta, then you're fine. Nothing is going to harm you. But if you're pramatta, then nothing is going to help you. Then you're screwed. Nothing is going to help you. If you're mukta, if you're an enlightened person, then you can live in the forest ashram, or you can live in an apartment building or a 3-story house or whatever, in a palace. It's not going to harm your spirituality or whatever. It's not going to harm you because you are liberated and you understand reality. Even when you're interacting with temporary or unreality, you're still understanding that it's temporary unreality. But if you're not a mukta, if you're pramatasya, if you're intoxicated or infatuated with the dream, then it doesn't matter if you go to the forest and act like a sadhu. In fact, it's very dangerous for you to go to the forest, he says. He's saying you should be more afraid of staying here in the forest because you're carrying 6 enemies with you. Shat sapatna. You're carrying 6 enemies with you. Your own mind and your 5 perceptions. Why are those things considered enemies? Because they make the unreality seem real. They allow the unreality to seem real. It's like the way that you access the dream. So he says if you're pramatasya, or if you're infatuated with them, then they're your enemies. You can take them to the forest, but it's not any safer for you in the forest. In fact, it's more dangerous. Bhayam, it's dangerous. But if you're jitendriya, if you're a person who's mastered those enemies, then you have atmarati. Or this is another way to say it, is the way that you master those enemies is by having atmarati. Atmarati means self-delight. Delight which comes from your own being. Then you don't seek delight because you already have it. So your perceptions then are not steamy and distorted. They're clear and accurate and objective. All right. So and then he says the intellect of a person who actually has atmarati is never thwarted. It's never troubled. Doesn't matter if they're in the griha, in a palace, in a home, or if they're in an ashram, in the forest somewhere. Understand? Any questions? So Bharata says, sometimes one can choose to stay dreaming after realize that life is just a lucid dream. It's not really a choice. You have karma. You still have your prarabdha. This is the twilight stage of liberation. You are liberated. You're not producing any new karma. You figured out how to live. You figured out what reality is. You're experiencing it. But you still have your momentum of your previous actions. So it's a short period of time on the cosmic scale, but it can be a whole lifetime or more on our little scale, where you're still connected with this dream, but you realize that it's a dream and you're in the process of waking up. Can you be enlightened without realizing? Nope. Enlightenment is about your perception, so how would you not be able to perceive your enlightenment? So Kermit asks, so one who hasn't yet mastered his senses is provided the most suitable path by his karmas? Yes, if anybody understands what he said something exactly correct. And that's why what Brahma said earlier was destiny is benevolent. Okay. So let's just read these 2 English translations and then go on to the next thing Brahma said. Even liberated people still have physical bodies, which they humbly accept as the manifestations of their previous karmas. They consider it the same way we consider the experiences we had in a dream after we wake up, so they do not solicit another body from the world. On the other hand, a person may retire to the forest, but if they are still intoxicated with self-ignorance, the forest is very dangerous for their spirituality, because they will live there with 6 enemies. In contrast, the wisdom of a person who has mastered their 6 senses and delights in the self can never be damaged, neither by the forest nor by a conventional home life. So he's got 2 classes of people. He's got the class of people who are intoxicated with unreality and the type of person who is clear about what reality is. So he has the liberated and the unliberated. The liberated person is screwed no matter what they do, because the unliberated person, the ignorant person, is not going to have great success no matter what they do or where they go, even if they try to imitate spiritual life. But the realized person is going to be fine no matter where they go. even if they have to imitate material life. Now, I believe he's going to introduce a third type. Ah, ah, so actually, the third type is the person that wants to. They're in the middle. They want to become clear. They want to get enlightened. So he says, ya shat sapatnam vijigi samano griheshu nirvishya yateta purvam atyeti durgashrita urjitari kshineshu kaman vicharet vipaschit. It's interesting, Brahma's talking to him this way. This language is using concepts of enemies and combat. It's interesting because this person that he's talking to is a sadhu, but from a warrior's DNA. He's from a royal family. So that's an interesting choice of words. So here's what he says. The wise have carefully concluded that anyone who wants to conquer these 6 enemies should make that effort first within home life. We can conquer strong enemies if we have the shelter of a fortress. Home life depletes our lusts. So a lot of interesting things he says here. You got the person who is ignorant, they're going to be messed up no matter what they do. You got the person who's liberated, they're going to be fine no matter what they do. Then you have a person in between. A person who's ignorant but wants to become enlightened. What should they do? So he says that the wise people, the vipaschits, they carefully thought about this, and they decided that you should weaken your enemy. You have 6 enemies, 6 things that are inclining you to believe the unbelievable. The funny thing is, the thing that is unbelievable. You have 6 enemies that are inclining us to believe, to accept as reality what isn't real. So we have to fight those enemies. So the wise person has a strategy for it. Make the enemies weaker. Don't just go running out in front of them in the middle of a field. There's 6 of them. You're going to be dead. Pull them into a valley, pull them into a crevice, pull them between 2 buildings or 2 rocks. Make them weaker somehow. Decrease their strength, then you can defeat them. So if you have some rocks or a place, some wall you can get behind, a fortress, that's called Durga. Durga means fortress. If you have a fortress, Durgashrita, if you take shelter of the fortress, and you may have 6 enemies, but you got a wall. You can fight them from the other side of the wall. You can beat them. So he compares a house to a fortress. He compares the Griha to Durga. He says the house is a fortress against these enemies. The intoxicated senses, which is interesting because inside a house you have a bed, you have a couch, you have a television, you have video games, you have liquor, you have everything that people have in their houses. But he says that's right. This is the place where you can placate and reduce the vehemence of these enemies. So he's saying, Kshineshu kamam. The kamas or the lusts, they become kshina. They start to decay and thin when you don't make such a big deal out of them. When you don't make them these huge, monumental things. You just do it. And then you realize, yeah, all right, that wasn't really worth all that work. That was a whole lot of work for a little bit of pleasure. That's what you'll actually realize if you get into life and do real life stuff. Then what happens is you stop thinking this real life stuff of money and beauty and sex and power and fame and respect. It's not worth it. You will not realize that until you do it. So what's the point of running away to a forest if you haven't realized that yet? You're just carrying those 6 enemies that want those things with you into a forest where you're all by yourself. Come into a home where you can be protected. Deal with these enemies there, in a protected space, in a regulated space, in a safe space. You understand? First, he says purvam. Griheshu nirvishya yateta purvam. First, purvam, the struggle, the yatta, should be nirvishya griha, inside a house. Deal with your sensual stuff inside a home. Then it will weaken the power of them. You'll realize, just like if you never met somebody, then you think they're Superman or something. But when you meet them, you realize they're a human. When you just have these big desires, I want to be rich, I want to be famous. Then you don't realize that when you get rich and famous, you're still you. And it doesn't matter. You still have the same problems when you try to wake up in the morning and the same problems when you try to go to sleep at night. So go ahead and try to be rich and try to be famous until you finally realize that it's not worth it. Before you realize that it's not worth it, don't stop. Keep trying. Okay, so those are the 3 types of people. The type of person, number 1, is the person who just thinks that money, fame, power, everything is where it's at. Nothing is going to be helpful to them. The second type of person is somebody who realizes the actual value in existence and the actual meaning of things. Nothing is going to harm that person. The third type of the person is one who's transitioning from one to the other. They should take it slow and start in a home setting and pursue desires in a safe place in a regulated manner to reduce the power of them. Then when the power of them is low, they can then go into intense practitioner situation, like living in an ashram, living in a forest. You understand what the Bhagavatam is saying to you? You got any questions? Wherever you go, there you are, spiritual samurai. What will the 6 enemies do to a person? They'll just pull you more into situations where you are doing a lot of work and a lot of stress for a little bit of reward. All right. Oh, hopefully those questions are answered. Thank you, Spiritual Samurai. I like your name. Which is the only thing I know about you right now. So it means something. 19. Hang on. Where did the text go? Let me get it. This is 5:1:19. Here it is. Kind of an awesome verse. Okay. Tvam Tvabjanabhang Grisaroja Kosha Durgashrito Nirjita Shat Sapatna Bunksveha Bogang Purushadishtan Vimukta Sangan Prakritim Bhajasva. This is it. This is the end of the point. So now he says, but you are neither type of person. I don't know if I can use the word neither. This is binary. But you are neither type of person. You have already defeated your 6 enemies by taking shelter of the fortress that is the whirl of the lotus feet of the one from whose navel sprouts a lotus. You are commanded by that person to enjoy all the enjoyables here. So enjoy this world while remaining liberated from all attachment. Okay, there's a bit to unpack in this statement. So he says Tvam tu. So this tu means you're not that person. But that's not you. Maybe that's a better translation. You're not the person who's striving to become. That's not your reason. You're not the person striving to become realized. You're realized. You have a lot of realization. So that's not why I'm telling you to go into a home. Ordinary people should not fear a home because it's helpful to their spirituality. A palace, whatever it is. You shouldn't fear that, not because you need that, but because you are already in the category of mukta. So he says an interesting thing here. In the previous text, he said grihashrita, durgashrita. Take shelter of the fortress of griha. The house is a castle. The house is a fortress. Take shelter of it to fight your enemies. So he does an interesting thing here in this text. He says, you are not the kind of person that needs the shelter of a house because you have taken some other house as your shelter. You live like a bee inside a flower. And that flower is the feet of Vishnu, the one from whose navel comes the flower of the universe. So he does a nice poem here. In these two parts, he really has a pretty big metaphor going. It's really quite nice. So that's Abjana Bhangri Saroja Kosha Durgashrita. That's your fortress. So that's not why that's why Nirjita Satsapatna, you already beat your 6 enemies. But that Purusha, that person whom you take shelter of, the reason why, this is the thing, he's neither type. Actually, you could say he's not any of the 3 types of people, because he's a bhakta. So you can say that he's not the type, he's not a mukta, nor is he a karmi, nor is he a sadhaka. So do you understand the words? He's not enlightened, he's not ignorant, and he's not trying to become enlightened. Well, why is he not enlightened? He's beyond that. He has combined some of the both. He has taken shelter of a home just like an ordinary person would. But that home is Vishnu. And all of his desires are fulfilled within that home. So that's why he has that's Atmarati. Atma actually means Vishnu. So he has no problem with his senses because his senses are connected to Vishnu. So this is the way that you actually defeat the senses, is you stop making them your enemies. Because instead of perceiving unreality, they perceive reality via education, by hearing the Shastra. So he's saying this person that that you're protected by, this person that you're sheltered in, this person is adishta, ati adishta, is telling you forcefully to do something, to go into a palace. You may say, wait, Vishnu is not saying that. Brahma is saying that. But that was the previous section. Brahma was saying destiny is enforced by Vishnu. Destiny is a system built by Vishnu. That's why it's benefic, because Vishnu is benefic. So embrace it. So if your destiny is forcing you into a thing, that's Vishnu's order. And if it's an inescapable destiny, then it's an atidishta. It's a very strong order. So he's telling you to bunkshu iha bhogam. Enjoy all the enjoyable stuff that's here in this world, in this conventional realm of being. That's the order that you got. That's your destiny. You should prakritim bhajasva. You should partake in this prakriti, in this world. But vimukta sangha, like a person who's woken up from the dream. Okay? So that's it. That's the Brahma's whole section on the self-realized need not fear the conventional world. Any questions? Question. When one does not seem to easily know who is my enemy or not, is this the enemy? Same spoken of in this reading. The enemies are the enemy here is an allegory. The enemy is the five perceptions and the mind. And the reason why they're called an enemy is because they incline us to believe falsehoods. And by believing in falsehoods, we believe we need to work very hard to get happiness. And that makes us work very, very hard for nothing. So let's just finish up. Is that the blessing of the Guru? Karma and karma to work towards moksha. Yes. So let's finish up by reviewing the English of all the stuff that we've translated so far. Let's see. So the whole thing started off with Priyavrata. It started off with Parikshit asking Shukadev, tell me about the fifth kid. Tell me about the fifth son. You didn't say anything about the fifth son. And you just really quickly mentioned that he was self-realized and then he became an emperor and then he achieved nirvana. So it doesn't make any sense to me. It seems really weird. Usually you are in a palace or a home first, and then, as a result, you can go and practice spiritual disciplines very intensely in a forest somewhere, and then you can achieve nirvana. So usually it goes A, B, C, but this guy went B, A, C. So I don't understand that. I want to know about that. O sage, if Priyavrata was a self-satisfied person, why would he act like a sensualist? Sensuality is the root cause of bondage to karma and the loss of everything. Anyone who is liberated from attachment certainly doesn't deserve to become obsessed with sensual things. The thoughts of great people cannot be touched by sensuality because they are satiated in the poetic shade of the most glorious. Poetic shade, like that. I am confused how a person addicted to spouse, house, and children would achieve the perfection of never having their mind full of Krishna. So then Shuka answers, you spoke correctly, you're right. This is weird. To go BAC is weird. Swan-like devotees of Bhagavan have their thoughts enwrapped in the poetic glories of Bhagavan, the verses of which are sweet as honey. But what you're not right about is that they therefore never have any contact with the conventional world. Their thoughts are always connected with Bhagavan. That does not necessitate that they have no contact with the conventional world. Sometimes this may burrow inward and externally cease, but they have not entirely lost their exalted placid status. That's his answer in one statement, and then he starts to give details about. Look, this is actually what happened to Priyavrata. He said, "Here's what happened to Priyavrata. That prince quickly understood the truth about his ultimate self-interest because of his devotion to the feet of the paramount devotee Narada. So he set his mind fully to meditation on Brahman. His father, however, saw that the prince possessed each and every quality that a ruler should have, and so asked him to take charge of governing the world." I believe it's actually the comment on this text, maybe the next one, that allowed me to clarify everything that I clarified at the beginning of the stream. That prince's mind was completely enwrapped in unwavering meditation on Bhagavan Vasudeva, and his every activity was centered solely around that, so he hated the idea of becoming a king, even though he knew he could not refuse his father. He hated the idea because he predicted that he would unavoidably be diverted into unworthy distractions, and his spiritual aspirations would be defeated. Then, the great self-born original divinity of the universe, who always contemplates how the creation can prosper, and who understands the ultimate function of everyone and everything in it, descended from his own abode, surrounded by his associates in all the Vedas. As he descended into the valley of intoxicating fragrance, he seemed like the moon illuminating it. Following him were the eldest immortals and a host of minor divinities singing his praise. When he arrived, maybe I should take out the word minor. It makes it sound a little bit unimpressive. When he arrived, Narada recognized him as his father, the creator of the universe, because of his swan craft. He, along with his, so it's Brahma. He, along with father and son, Manu and Priyavrata, immediately stood up and with articles of worship and worshipped Brahma with respectfully folded hands. The Vedas praise Brahma as the epitome of merciful qualities. After tolerating their worship, he smiled at Prince Priyavrata and spoke. So here's the part where he says, fate is benevolent, you should accept it. My dear boy, please consider my sincere and truthful statement. Fate is beyond our comprehension, and so does not ever deserve our derision. Myself, Shiva, your father, and this great sage, Narada, all of us always faithfully uphold whatever it ordains. There is no way an embodied being can ever undo whatever it wants to do. Whatever fate, it is unclear, right? Whatever fate. Not by power of learning, not by magic or intellect, certainly not by money or law, not by anything you can do or by anything anyone can do for you. Lol. By a puja. My dear, people have to accept, engage with, and give up the bodies ordained to them from unseen causes, whether they produce regret, confusion, fear, happiness, or sadness. My boy, its ordinances are the ropes that bind us to the qualities and actions we must accept and carry out. Even if we tried very hard, we would not be able to accept this. We all follow the orders of our master, just as the four-footed follow the two-footed, who has tied a rope through their nose. My dear, we must certainly accept what the master ordains to us. The happiness or sadness of it is really the result of our own qualities and deeds. Accept whatever the master gives, for he is like a sighted person leading a blind person. And then today's stuff. Even liberated people still have physical bodies, which they humbly accept as the manifestation of their previous karmas. They consider it the same way we consider the experiences we had in a dream after we wake up. So they do not solicit another body from the world. On the other hand, a person may retire to the forest, but if they are still intoxicated with self-ignorance, the forest is very dangerous for their spirituality because they will live there with 6 enemies. In contrast, the wisdom of a person who has mastered their 6 senses and delights in the self can never be damaged, neither by the forest nor by a conventional home life. The wise have carefully concluded that anyone who wants to conquer these 6 enemies should make that effort first within home life. We can conquer strong enemies if we have the shelter of a fortress. Home life depletes our lusts. But you are neither type of person. You have already defeated your 6 enemies by taking shelter of the fortress that is the whirl of the lotus feet of the one from whose navel sprouts a lotus. You are commanded by that person to enjoy all the enjoyables here. So enjoy this world while remaining liberated from all attachment. That's what we translated so far. Yes. All right, guys. Thank you. So how much is really in our control towards moksha? Is that it's all in your control? It's only in your control. Your whole future is up to you. Your destiny is what's happening now. Okay? And destiny may be a difficult English word. But when we say destiny, it means the stuff happening to you now. What made it happen to you now? Brahma said. He said the reason why stuff is happening to you now isn't because Zeus decided he rolled the dice. The reason why something's happening to you now is because you did something before. And so by that same logic, the stuff that you do now will produce the future. So you have a choice about how to interact with what's happening to you now. How big your choice is not the same for everybody because of the force of the previous actions. Maybe a huge force. It may be very difficult for you to do anything, even slightly different than what you've already done. So for people that have huge karmas, they have very little freedom in making any choice. They act instinctually and reflexively and predictably by their chemicals that are in their body. It just makes them act a certain way. But other people but by beginning to work with this, you gradually loosen the force of the previous karmas. You gradually stop making more new karmas. So the amount of force that's on you of destiny becomes less, and your freedom to be a little different gradually increases. And so eventually you can stop seeing things in the way that you're habituated to see them and start seeing things in an educated way. If you listen to the Vedas, you can get educated. And you can get moksha. It all depends on you and your efforts. Okay, guys. Thank you so much for attending and being participating. I'll see you again next time.